Good morning, everyone. We promise not to keep you from lunch longer than our allotted period, so don't worry about asking questions afterwards. We've got a really diverse area to cover in the next 45 minutes. I'm delighted to have a panel with really interesting, diverse backgrounds. So I'm going to start off by asking them to introduce themselves, but perhaps I should introduce myself. First, I'm Dan Fohn. I'm Vice President of Food Safety, Quality and Sanitation at Dollar Tree, which for the non-Americans is a tiny chain of just 8,000 stores across the United States. So to my right, Eduardo, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. So I'm Eduardo Martinez. I have the privilege to be leading QA and food safety for RBI. You may not know RBI, Restaurant Brands International. We are in the food service, quick service restaurant QSR side. So we are franchisors, owners of brands like Burger King, Tim Hortons, Firehouse, or Popeyes. Very happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Laura Kerwin and I'm sustainability lead at Nutritics. I suppose Nutritics is a food data management platform and we bridge the gap for industry to regulation. My background is food safety, so I'm a nutritionist. I worked in the European Food Safety Authority and for the European Food Information Resource, and I was vice chair of the Sustainable Health Systems panel for the European Health Parliament, so delighted to be here today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rebecca Sodworth. I'm Director of Policy at the Food Standards Agency in the UK, and I'm here to give a regulator perspective on this topic, and really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, guys. So a lot of areas to cover, but I want to start by looking at how consumer expectations have changed. Sometimes we think in the industry that we know what consumers want to see, but I wonder if that is the case. So Eduardo, do you want to start us off? What are the most significant changes that you've seen in terms of consumer expectations on labels?
Yeah, so I can provide and share the perspective from the QSR side, right? In RBI, with the 4 brands, we have roughly 35,000 restaurants across, more than 120 countries. So in terms of what our guests are expecting, of course, obvious, right? It's getting information on ingredients, allergens, and nutrition, digital. Digital means, quick, accessible, ready to access to it, right, in our front counters with QR codes or websites and so on. But actually, what we think is as well super important, and we see that from our guests' feedback, is it cannot just be like digital, like having the the front counter team member saying, hey, yeah, that's a QR code, scan, and you get, and don't ask me questions. We need the human factor, right? So I was saying 35,000 restaurants globally with an average of 30 team members per restaurant. If we do the math, that's more than 1 million team members that are preparing, in the restaurants, the food, the Whoppers, for example. But the same 1 million team members are the ones that, time to time, the guests may come to the front counter and ask questions. Like, hey, I don't understand. So I have your app, I have the allergens information, but I don't understand. What is that? Or, several questions. So actually, in my background, all my career have been in QA and food safety. I'm actually a vet, but I had the good, super experience to spend within Burger King, especially 4 years leading operations. So I was overseeing and learning how actually things happen at the restaurant level. And one of the things that I remember and I still keep in mind is that if it happens at the restaurant, it matters. So these questions, right, of a guest asking, hey, what is that? Can you explain to me? Can you guide me on your, super fancy, ingredients or allergen information? It's super important to have those team members, more than 1 million, with tools to answer correctly these questions.
Right.
Right? Because we can have like a high-level digitalized systems to make sure that the information on allergens, for example, it's accurate and so on. We can design our processes to make sure that the team members do not have the responsibility to answer all those questions. but those questions happen, and the team members need to be ready, right? And especially in terms of allergens, a good or especially a bad answer can have an impact,
Cool.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, great.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And Laura, same question, changes in consumer expectations.
Yeah, I think it's after changing massively. I think from our perspective, we work mainly with the food service sector, managing their supply chain data, managing their menus, managing their digital menus and their allergen matrices. What we're seeing is consumers are demanding more data. They want data around where ingredients are coming from, sustainability. They're actively asking the front of house teams about carbon impact, carbon emissions, what are your sustainability strategies. They're also looking for it in writing. We've seen in the Food Standards Agency new guidance that written allergens are now best practice in the industry. The verbal conversation is obviously very important and will remain very important for people asking for more information and to clarify. But if you don't have those in writing on your site to support your teams, you're really introducing a risk to your business. And the last thing is accuracy. So we know the Digital Markets and Competition and Consumer Act is going live in the UK on April 6th. And what that means is there are massive push from consumers and also from the regulation side for accurate data. And I suppose once that act is introduced, companies across the UK may actually be subject to a fine of 10% of their annual revenue across the year or of their group, or 5% of daily turnover, if it is shown that they do not have accurate data around pricing or if they're doing any greenwashing across different consumer points of contact. So we're seeing this massive push for more data, written data, and more accurate data, and that's really coming across from the consumer side, but also really been backed up by legislation, which is really nice to see. So challenging for food businesses working in the area.
Yeah, fascinating. And so I think that brings us on really nicely, Rebecca, to understand quite how does a regulator keep up with the speed of change at the moment in particular. So again, same question to you. What are you seeing at the agency?
Absolutely, and I completely agree with my fellow panel members that consumers want more. They want more from their written information, they want more from their label, they want more from their interaction with businesses, and they want more from the regulator. And as a regulator, it can be quite difficult to navigate some of the tensions and challenges that we have when we're deciding what should be mandated in regulations, what should we be working with industry to do on a voluntary basis, what information is absolutely fundamental and necessary for everybody, what information can we expect in terms of consumers' ability to personalize their experience for perhaps groups who have different needs and requirements. And those can be what are sometimes called lifestyle requirements, so choices about environmental impact of your diet or sort of choices like, for example, vegan diets. Or they can be health-related, where it's really crucial that certain sections of the population have really specific information that's tailored to them. So this is quite a challenge for us as a regulator. And just to give you one example, if you think about the sort of the rise in environmentally and health-conscious diets and people who adopt a vegan diet, for example, that has grown hugely in recent years. But as a regulator, we became aware that there are some people with a food allergy who are using vegan labels as a proxy for allergen information. So that's another factor we have to consider, which is how are people behaving and what should our response be there as a regulator? Do we need to change the law? Do we need to change our guidance? What's our responsibility? And in that case, we had a public information campaign. We tried to raise awareness amongst people with a food allergy that if it says vegan on the label, that is not a guarantee that it is free of animal products. And we worked with industry to make sure that their labeling, for example, in the use of precautionary allergen labeling and free from statements didn't mislead consumers. So that illustrates some of the challenges we have to navigate and how important it is that we get this right and how we have to be thinking all the time about, how are we gathering consumer views, perceptions, needs, how do we understand industry best practice, and what perhaps are some of the opportunities that might be available with new technologies and also some of the risks there.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, really, and I think it leads on to my next question, which is going to go to you, Eduardo, which is, how do you cope with that? Because you layer on top of a regulatory requirement, multiple countries, consumer expectations, your marketing. How do you balance that?
Yeah. So it's complex, right? So you heard more than 100, so it's actually 124 countries, right? So that's many different, probably not 124 regulations, right? Because in some regions, areas like the EU, there is a very high level of harmonization, but with 124 countries, many different regulations. And in terms of our customers' expectations as well, not every customer expectation is the same across the globe, right? That's obvious. But there is one thing that we emphasize a lot to our partners, right, operating the restaurants, is information and informing our consumers about allergens or ingredients. It's not just a regulatory compliance check. It's more than that, right? Especially in our case as global brands, we need to go beyond that. And that's, so to give you an example on allergens, right? Or sensitive allergens, right? Like nuts, peanuts, traces on dessert toppings, right? Which are quite common in the industry. It's not just, hey, yeah, we reduce the risk of regulatory compliance, we reduce the risk of litigation, right? So the risk of having a consumer saying, hey, you did it not well according to the regulation. We need to go beyond that, because what we need is to actually reduce the actual risk of the incident happening, right? We all know here that, and you may have heard like that many times, that, it can get you, 30 years to build a brand reputation. You can lose that in 30 seconds. Right? And to give you an example, these desserts toppings, right, where in some markets may have like traces of peanuts. We have, in order to reduce that actual risk, right, we have implemented segregation, easy things that we can do at the restaurant level to avoid the possibility of having, Snickers, toppings within the board where we prepare the Whoppers. And the nuance is, we are still not able to say, hey, our restaurant, it's free from that allergen. We know that, and that's there, but we can actually reduce the likelihood of having that incident. We will always be compliant. In terms of litigation risk, there will be very low, but if an incident happens, the damage is done, regardless of the regulatory compliance. And sometimes it's not, clear, or and that's something me and my team emphasize a lot with our partners.
No, great, thank you. And I think, Rebecca, perhaps to come back on that, in an era of better regulation, deregulation, less regulation, focused regulation, how do you manage what you feel needs to be dictated, mandated, as opposed to issuing guidance, issuing best